Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another edition of the Running the Bases podcast. This is a little Running the Bases podcast special where me, Michael Garaffa, will discuss what a potential Francisco Lindor trade could look like. I've been thinking a lot about this over the last few hours, ever since we've had the talk today about a potential Lindor trade that is seemingly going to happen before opening day. Now, the Indians have spoken to a lot of teams about this, apparently, and I think it's something that is important to talk about. So a few things that I wanted to touch on right away is the two teams that seem to be the most involved in what this trade would be, and that's the Mets and the Yankees. Now, the Mets and Yankees could have their very first battle, and this has been, a lot of people are saying this could be the very first battle between Steve Cohen and the Yankees organization. And now a lot of speculation goes around that as to what would be involved in a deal for Lindor from both sides. So you start off with both teams here, what a timeline would look like. First off, for the Yankees, a team that a lot of people would probably say Lindor was more fit for because he would rather be, I would think that a player like Lindor would rather be with the Yankees, a team that has an establishment over the Mets. But the problem I see with the Yankees right away is that Lindor trade really revolves heavily around the signing of DJ LeMahieu. Now, right off the bat, it is really going to be a question mark of what DJ LeMahieu is going to do. Now, DJ LeMahieu is obviously a star player. He's in the finale of the MVP voting, won a Silver Slugger tonight for the Yankees at second base, and there's a lot of question marks around where he's going to sign. I personally don't know what's going to happen there. A lot of people are assuming that LeMahieu is not going to re-sign with the Yankees, which then opens up that hole at second base, then you can see clearly a move from Torres over to second to fill up that spot with LeMahieu. Now, the question mark with that is then you have that Lindor trade that could happen. However, with that then taking place, you also have to wait to make that move until you know exactly where Francisco Lindor signs. DJ LeMahieu signs. When DJ LeMahieu signs somewhere, let's say he re-signs with the Yankees, then you could probably see Gleyber Torres involved in a trade for Lindor. But if he doesn't re-sign, then you will see more of a prospect trade between the Yankees and the Indians. So the issue with the Yankees there is this really all revolves around the timing of DJ LeMahieu's signing. If he signs with the Yankees or somewhere else, either way, you cannot really develop a trade without knowing where he's going to be for sure. That opens the door for the Mets. The Mets can make a trade right now for Francisco Lindor. They don't have any question marks. The only question mark would be who is involved in that trade. Now, a lot of people are saying that, it's pretty clear that the Indians are going to probably target one of the shortstops at that position for the Mets, which would be Ahmed Rosario and Andres Gimenez. If you do trade away one of those players, then you're getting rid of one of the future of that position, but it doesn't really matter because if you're getting Francisco Lindor, that's really solving that issue. So you would automatically most likely see either Gimenez or Rosario involved in that trade. There's also been talks that the Indians are looking for an outfielder, and I think the best fit for that would probably be Dominic Smith. Smith doesn't really have a position right now with the Mets, and it doesn't really make sense for him to be on a team where he's just going to be a bench player. He is worth a lot, and this could be a big opportunity for the Mets. Now, if you do end up putting Smith in that trade, then you also fill that spot of, Smith was probably going to be moved anyway in this offseason. So if you do end up doing that, you then have Rosario or Gimenez and then Smith. You could also throw Brandon Nimmo in there as that spot. It really depends. And then the other positional player in that would probably end up being Ronnie Mauricio, a top Mets prospect. So the big questions right now in that trade for the Mets would be who would you want to include in that deal? Personally, I think the most fitting trade would be Andres Gimenez, Dom Smith, and then Ronnie Mauricio. Now, that would probably lean a little bit more towards the Indian side in terms of talent, but the Indians have been known to have a high asking price for Lindor, and that might really fit what they want. The thing that I see is that you're leveraging, you're going to need to have you look at one of the two outfielders and the two shortstops. You've got Smith and Nimmo. With Nimmo, I think if you throw Gimenez in there, a more fair trade would be to throw Nimmo in there because Nimmo doesn't provide as much of a value as Smith does in a trade. But if you decide to go the other route and go with Smith, you might be more inclined to go with Rosario, where Rosario doesn't have as much trade value as Jimenez does. So there's a lot of question marks around that. And that would also open up the door to, once those players are traded, you have the question mark of the other players that are left. If that deal gets completed, I personally believe that a deal with the Mets and the Indians would be more likely to get done than the Yankees. So this opens up the doorway for everything else that would follow. The Mets would then have, let's assume, I'm just going to go right off the bat and just make an assumption that a trade would be Lindor for Jimenez, Smith, and Mauricio. We're just going to play with that as the what-if scenario right now. If that trade goes through, the Mets then have at the shortstop position Francisco Lindor and Ahmed Rosario. Then you are left in the outfield with Brandon Nimmo, Jeff McNeil, and Michael Conforto, which is all fine and dandy. However, the Mets have spoken a lot about wanting to sign George Springer. So then you have to tackle with that. If you end up signing Springer, then you've got an outlier in the outfield, and Brandon Nimmo seems to be the obvious outlier there. So what I would then think of is you first talk to Nimmo. Would he be okay with staying in a bench role? You're going to get a lot of prospects for Nimmo most likely, but would he prefer staying with the Mets as a bench player? Then you also have Rosario at shortstop, who you don't really know where he's going to go. You can't really play him at second. You've got J.D. Davis at third, and it would just come down to a matter of, would the Mets rather get rid of Rosario or would the Mets rather get rid of Davis? I personally believe that Davis provides a little bit of a better future for the Mets than Rosario would, especially because Rosario is not a third baseman or second baseman. So you've got two players that you would have to trade away, which would be Brandon Nimmo and Ahmed Rosario. You can either pair them in a trade together and get more prospects, or you can do them separately. There's also been a lot of talk about the Yankees who would end up needing a shortstop or second baseman if LeMahieu leaves. This is that open doorway that the Mets have seen now and have been talking about for a while of, could a potential Mets-Yankees trade happen? And this is where it very well may happen, where you could see Ahmed Rosario going to the Yankees, and then you have that trade take place and the Yankees will flip some prospects over. This is an opportunity this offseason for the Mets to be buyers and sellers. You get players on the free agent market and even get Lindor, but you also will then have to trade away some of your bigger players that you can get prospects for. So this is really a win-win scenario. And then you look at Brandon Nimmo, who you probably won't get as much for him as you would for Ahmed Rosario, but you can still get a good chunk of prospects for him. So you never know. I mean, we've seen a lot of talk about the Brewers who have been talking about Josh Hader. We've seen him go on the trade market a lot. What you could also see the Mets doing is potentially combining Rosario and Nimmo in a trade for Josh Hader, even though the Brewers really now, especially with his postseason performance, have Orlando Arcia in that shortstop spot, and you wouldn't really want to mess around with him too much. But you never know. Anything can happen. And as we've seen in the past, Major League Baseball in the offseason is going to be an incredible time. So these are just my personal opinions, what I think would happen if a Francisco Lindor trade were to take place. I personally do feel like a trade between the Mets and the Indians for Lindor would make more sense because it is more likely to happen quicker than the Yankees. It's just a matter of, would the Indians rather wait to get that deal done and run the risk of the Mets potentially making these trades elsewhere? We'll have to wait and see. These are all big question marks coming up, and we'll be obviously tackling them right here on the Running the Bases podcast as we go throughout the postseason. You might see random shows like this happen because you never know what's going to take place over the course of an offseason. And again, we are always going to be your home for any free agent acquisition that happens that is a big player that signs. We'll be covering it as quickly as we possibly can. So thank you, everybody, for tuning on in today. Hope you enjoyed it. And thank you so much. We'll see you all next time. Let's see what takes place in the next few days and weeks in the matter of the offseason.